Hey guys, this episode I thought it would be fun to contribute a little feature to the Honeybadger RubyGem to enable insights on the command line. So this is a new feature that Honeybadger has released that allows you to track metrics and events and other things that happen in your Rails app. You can query them, you can graph them, make dashboards out of this stuff. It's really awesome. And they have actually enabled this to be built into your Rails applications automatically. So you can track things like Sidekick metrics, solid queue metrics, AutoTuner, and Puma metrics, which is really cool. So this is some really useful stuff you can just like enable in your config by saying insights enabled is true in your YAML config, and that's awesome. But when you install Honeybadger, you run bundle install after you add the gem, then you run bundle exec Honeybadger install, and you give it your API key, but that's all you can do. You can't actually have it enable insights automatically. There's no option for that. So what I wanted to do is take their gem, since it's open source, and add that feature to it. So we need to pull up the Honeybadger RubyGem. I've already forked it and cloned the repository locally, so we'll play with that and we'll look into how it works. So I have that open here in VS Code, and the way that this is going to work is we're going to start with bin Honeybadger. This is the executable. When you say bundle exec Honeybadger, it's going to run the bin Honeybadger executable inside of the gem. So it's going to then set up the CLI and start executing it. And if we go into lib Honeybadger CLI.rb, we'll see that this adds the vendor to the load path. And there's a CLI folder in there, and it requires Thor. Thor is actually something that is a Rails repository. And this is basically what Rails uses for the commands that you run, like the Rails generators and things like that. Thor can do a bunch of cool stuff. Thor's website here, I have pulled up, is just kind of basic, but it shows you how to build command line apps with Thor in Ruby, which is awesome. It's used in Bundler and Rails, all kinds of things. And it parses the command line arguments for you. It handles flags and options and other stuff, help messages, you name it. So one of the things that we want to look in here for is options. If we search for that, we can see that it looks like you can define an option after you define the description of a command. The command itself is just a function. And Thor, by inheriting from Thor, it somehow knows how to wire all that stuff up for you, which is pretty cool. So then you can access those options inside of here, which is pretty cool. By default, options are strings, but you can specify an alternate type for any options. So that's cool. We can specify this is a Boolean. We can get the from, and so on. That's kind of what we want. We want yell. In our case, we want to call it like Honeybadger insights, or probably dash insights. It will be a Boolean, yes or no, so we can decide whether or not to write true or false inside of the YAML file. And that should be as simple and straightforward as it is. So let's take a look at the code and see how it goes from here. We load the CLI main, and then it seems like that is what is called next. So if we go to CLI, main.rb, we can look in here. It requires a bunch of commands, and then it has this main that inherits from Thor. So that is where we're getting that functionality, and this is where all the methods are defined, like the help method, the install method. Now, if we look at some of the other examples, like test, there's an option here for dry run, type of Boolean, alias is short version is -d, default is false, and so on. This is pretty similar to what we want to add to this right here. We want to add something like insights, type is Boolean. We could say -i for insights. Maybe the alias doesn't make sense. We could remove it if we didn't want that. That's probably up to the Honeybadger developers and maintainers to decide on that stuff. The default right now is disabled, so we'll leave the default as false. If they want to enable it by default in the future, they can just change it to true and release a new version of the gem. And this can be enable Honeybadger insights. And that is that. So this install method instantiates this new install class, passes in the options and the API key and runs it. So in theory, if we can find install.rb, we will have a class that has initialize, takes the options and the API key that Thor parsed out for you, and then it has this run method. So installing Honeybadger, the version, it does some stuff to figure out the root location for the config. Then it sets the config path to Honeybadger YAML inside that config root folder. It says, hey, if this file already exists, let's skip this work. Otherwise, we want to do all this, which looks like it creates the configuration. So if we read through this, we should see some place where it defines that YAML file. And this looks to be the here doc that defines that. So in theory, what we want to do is say enable Honeybadger insights, and we can have insights, enable, and then use our options to get insights from that. So in theory, this is all we have to do to make this work. Something that might be useful to do, since we've never tried this before, is we can go up above and put and print out the options like that and see what comes through when we execute this. So if we open up our terminal, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into a different application. We've got one here called store. If we go into the gem file on that, I'm going to do something crazy and use Vim inside of here. We can then add Honeybadger as a relative path. So here I have the gem Honeybadger, but instead of installing from RubyGems, we install from our local copy of that repository. And then we can run bundle in here and then bundle exec Honeybadger. And we can then say help install. And you will see our -i -insights -no insights in order to specify that new feature. So that option was automatically generating these things for us by adding that to Thor. So that's good. So in theory, if we run Honeybadger install, we give it an example fake API key, and we say --insights. What we should see, even though this blew up, we gave it a fake API key, so this isn't actually going to hit their API and send a test correctly. But it says installing Honeybadger, you're already on Honeybadger, so you're all set. That means that I've got a Honeybadger YAML file already. So let's go remove Honeybadger from the config folder and run the command again. And there we got the hash printed out. Insights is true. So it shows us that that options hash that it saw has insights is true. If we cat config Honeybadger YML, at the bottom we see insights enable is true. If we want to do it without that, we can run the command without that or -no insights. Then we get insights is false, and when in that little print statement we did. And if we cat Honeybadger YAML, there we go, we get enable is false. So that is exactly what we need to do. And that was all the code we had to do. Thor is awesome. So we added a single option here, and then we just simply used the option inside of our YAML file. And because Booleans in Ruby, when converted to a string, true or false, is going to print out the string true or false, which we can add to our YAML file right here. And we don't have to do any casting of that because the toString version of it does exactly what we want. Pretty awesome. So we've actually built that entire feature in basically one real line of code, adding the option, and then these are just adding the string and accessing that. And that's about it. As we go through here, depending on the specs for this, the test suite for this feature, we may want to go and add that. So if we go up and look at the spec folder, we can see under features, there is an install spec that is going to run the Honeybadger install command. And we could probably use this and analyze that to create our own test suite for it as well, to make sure that if you pass that in, it is going to enable it and set it up correctly, or at least include that in the config file. So most of this looks to be that it creates the configuration file, sends a test notification. Here is the no test option. That is something that was not documented on the install method here. So maybe that is somewhere else. I'm curious about that. Or we can also look at install and see how it passes that along. There we go. So it looks like it runs the test command and says install is true and calls that other command from there. So possibly the test command definition here would have that flag, no test. Maybe that's automatically generated because it passes along to the other command. That actually could be something cool that that happens automatically when you're chaining these things with Thor. I'm not sure. I assume that's probably how that works. That's pretty cool if so. But if we come back to the test file, we don't really have any tests that do the same thing that we're trying to do here. So we are going to have to piece it together. But something important to note here is the two scenarios at the bottom use it behaves like CLI installer. And if you didn't notice or aren't familiar with RSpec, there are shared examples for CLI installers. So those two scenarios are going to test all of these tests against two different variables, which are basically two different config file locations. So when we write our tests here, I'm just going to stick them here. We need that to be generic and use that config file variable to reference the location so that we can use that and follow the same pattern. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab this run command. I'm going to put it in a test, and we're going to have insights, and we'll have a do block and an end, and we're going to need some assertion, but it says like with the insights option. And so we'll need some sort of expectation for this. But the easiest thing for us to do is kind of run this test and see what happens. So we'll say bundle, make sure we have all our test dependencies. We'll run bundle exec rspec, spec features, install spec, and we will give it this new test line 43, and we will drop into our binding IRB. So if we look at that config file variable, this is going to be the one pointing to temp features honeybadger.yml. And if we go to temp features honeybadger.yml, it has the new stuff, and we can test against this file, which is great. So what we want to do is we want to basically load that file. So we'll say YAML load file, config file, and we'll see if that works. There it goes, and then we can just simply dig and say insights enable, and we can make sure that that returns true. So we'll say this, we expect this to equal true. And then basically for the other example, we want to have the with no insights run dash no insights, and we want insights enabled to be false. And we want to explicitly say true or false probably here instead of truthy or falsy, because that is the exact value we want to see in there. We don't want to see anything else that could evaluate to true or nil that could evaluate to false. So now we can run these tests again, and hopefully we will see them pass. Here they are failing, and this is something that I was running into where some of the files do work, but sometimes they don't. So it like creates these files temporarily inside this, and then they disappear. And I'm not sure if that is that this run command is cleaning up that file, or something is cleaning up the file that gets created, because inside of our temp directory, we want to see that there is that features Rails, Honeybadger YML, but then like the temp Honeybadger YML right here should also exist as well. And so it's kind of strange. I'm not entirely sure what's going on, why these files do not exist. But the config file should point to exactly where we expect it to be. So this is definitely a little weird. But one of the things I did notice was this ran run command and stop. And I figure this one is referencing the config file afterwards. And so possibly this run command and stop doesn't, like maybe run command cleans up any files that were created during that command. And so maybe this is what we want, where it will run it and then stop so the file doesn't get cleaned up, because we can definitely tell this is referencing that config file that it creates and accessing it in both cases. So what we could do is we can go down here and we can say run command and stop, and then transfer the -s insights flag to it, paste it in, and attempt that on both of these, just in hopes that that might work. So we can run our install spec file. I'm just going to run the whole thing. And would you look at that? It all passed. So apparently that is what's going on. I'm not familiar with this. It appears to be from this gem called Aruba, which I've never used. But I'm going to say, like, let's group these in together. They've got a context for the no test option with insights, with the insights flag. Let's say enables insights as a better description. And we won't specify the -- insights because we're going to do it a little bit different in both of these. And say disables insights. And that will just give us a little bit better description of our tests and the context and, you know, this nesting behavior that our spec gives you to kind of explain what the test is and what context and how it fits into the puzzle and so on. But that does pass all of our tests. We can run bundle exec rspec to make sure the entire test suite passes and doesn't, we haven't affected anything else that other tests might be checking for. But in general, it looks like we're safe here. Maybe these tests aren't even necessary. It doesn't need to be here, but it's probably the complete way to contribute to Honeybadger. Otherwise, they might get errors about our errors that we gave to them. That would be really weird. So far, so good. The test suite is all green. 800 passing tests, which is great. So I think we're good to go. So now, what we would want to do is we want to check out a branch. Let's remove this example Honeybadger YML file. Let's get status. Let's get checkout -b. Let's say insights flag as our branch name. We will get add -p. We're going to want this chunk for, let me make this a little bigger so we can see it. We're going to want this chunk for Honeybadger insights in the config file in our installer. We add the options, of course, and then we have our tests, and that is it. We have a complete new feature here, and we can say adds insights flag to the install command. And maybe we want to do a longer message. Let's just do that. Let's say adds -- insights to install command. This makes it easy to enable or disable Honeybadger insights when installing in an application. Perfect. That should be good enough. Maybe we want to have an example here, but we could say, you know, if we want to do that, we could say bash bundle exec Honeybadger install API key. Do they call it API key or token? Let's look real quick and be a little consistent. They call it API key. Insights. And there we go. I think that'll work great and be at least a good starting place for Honeybadger to do that. So with that, we can then git push-u origin, so our fork on GitHub that we cloned from. I did that before this lesson. So we'll push up there, then we can go open that link, continue to github.com. We'll do that there. Then we can make a pull request from our branch of insights flag to Honeybadger's RubyGem in their main branch, the master branch, and there we go. So excellent. And let's see here. I talked to Josh about this one before we did, so let me grab his username. Joshua IP. And voila, there we go. We'll create a pull request, let maintainers edit it if needed. Maybe they need to update the documentation, that sort of thing. But this should tag them, Josh, who I spoke to. So then we can go dig into this, see if there's any additional things we might want to add or whatever. But this is a small contribution, but a really cool one because we can use this in all of our own applications, just specifying this flag. Then if they decide they want to enable it by default for Ruby applications, they can change that default to true. We could then disable it if we ever wanted to for whatever reason. But it is now an option that we can use in our applications, which is pretty sweet and was literally just one line of code here and 2 lines for a config file. And most of the time we spent actually figuring out the tests and how to make those work, which is, how most things go. But we are 100% confident this change does work, and that is good to go. And another great reason to use Honeybadger as well for the new insights functionality. So that is it for this lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to see more things like this, let us know in the comments below. And I would love to see your Honeybadger insights dashboards as well to get ideas of what are some metrics and other things that I might want to see in a dashboard that I haven't thought of yet. So I'd love to see what you guys are up to. Peace.